opportunity with the Kentucky legislature also stemmed from my knowledge of the history of this idea. For many years, researchers have suspected that animal protein is not optimal for human health. This information has sometimes bubbled to the surface only to get buried in a sea of misinformation because of the influence of industry and government. A perfect example of this was in the late 1970s with a Senate committee chaired by Senator George McGovern.
So the McGovern committee held a series of hearings and published a report, Dietary Goals for Americans. The Dietary Goals for Americans realized that many of the problems, the chronic diseases, were related to the increases in saturated fat and cholesterol and sugar, refined carbohydrate consumption. And so there was this shift towards we need to move towards some of the foods eaten by societies that weren't plagued by these chronic degenerative conditions. So if you look at the populations around the world that are not dying of our 10 leading killers, it is rural Africa and rural China. And they have kind of, in one sense, remarkably different diets, at the same time actually remarkably similar diets. Without those studies that showed people this remarkable variability of disease rates around the world was not genetics, right? It's not just that people have different genes, but when you transplant people, they acquire the disease rates of where they're going, and generation after generation it gets worse and worse as they lose some of their traditional plant-based eating and start kind of accumulating this kind of Western lifestyle. And I think it was in that environment that the McGovern Committee said Americans need to shift their diets towards a more plant-based diet. The report first came out January 1977, but was kind of beaten back by some of the politics as such that there was kind of a much watered-down report by the end of that year.
I have pleaded in my report and will plead again orally here for more research on the problem before we make announcements to the American public.
Well, I would only argue that senators don't have the luxury that a research scientist does of waiting until every last shred of evidence is in.
The greatest pushback came from the meat and egg industries, but the sugar industry called McGovern a puritanical do-gooder. The Salt Institute came out very strongly. The dairy industry wanted the goals scrapped. So not only did the agricultural lobby win in terms of changing the wording of the report, but they had the entire Nutrition Committee disbanded. And so, I mean, it really changed even how nutrition policy was going to go forward in the federal government. Hey, I mean, you look at, and these political reverberations continue to this day.
I saw good people making really stupid decisions. They didn't want to get crosswise of the mainstream. The mainstream being greatly influenced by the corporate sector.
Dairy products, nature's most nearly perfect food. And remember this, Tom, where the demand for other may fluctuate over the years, not milk and its products. Because folks need milk every day as much as, well, almost as much as the oxygen in the air.
I just saw these outside forces coming in and shaping our knowledge. Not only shaping our knowledge in very narrowly focused ways, but also working hard to keep this from the public.
This is what is laying to waste. I mean, the most likely reason our loved ones will die is heart disease, which is completely preventable, treatable, often reversible. I mean, and so, I mean, people should be angry that they don't know. Why didn't anyone tell me this?
I had gotten fed up with the corporate invasion of what I thought was academia. Of course, I was being pretty idealistic. My research was handsomely funded for years by public money and only public money. And here they're not being allowed to hear this information. I felt like I owed something to the taxpayer. I kind of got fed up with it, and of course I was coming home and complaining to my wife about this, and she said, "Why don't you just sit down and write a book?"